All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive on something kind of different, a little bit unconventional.
Yeah.
Vulnerability as a superpower.
Vulnerability as a superpower.
As a
Yeah.
superpower.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty counterintuitive.
It does, and yet
Sure.
it's the thesis that Joseph Aminian puts forward in his essay.
Right.
And it is a very interesting read, and I'm excited to get into it with you today.
It is. I think what's really fascinating about this essay is that it's not just theoretical. He's not just talking about this concept in the abstract.
Yeah.
He's actually living it. His own life is kind of a case study in this idea of vulnerability as a superpower. And he's pretty open about it in the essay too, which is, I think, what makes it so compelling.
Yeah, so, okay. Who is this guy, Joseph Aminian, and why should we care about what he has to say about vulnerability?
Well, for starters, he's the heir to one of the wealthiest families in Azerbaijan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like we're talking old money, going back generations, nobility, aristocracy.
So like ancient cities and vast networks, the whole 9 yards. But here's the thing. He's chosen not to claim his inheritance.
Wait, he's just walking away from all of that? Why?
He says it's to avoid potential conflicts within the family. He even hints that these disputes could escalate to a regional level, which, given his family's history, it's not that far-fetched.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is some high-stakes family drama.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So how does this tie back to the vulnerability thing?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. He claims he's been using this vulnerability as a superpower strategy since he was a kid, specifically to deal with all the complexities of his family.
Oh, wow.
He talks about how he made a deliberate choice not to engage in power struggles, even when he was facing, threats or attempts to control him.
So, like, when somebody was coming at him, he
wouldn't fight back in the conventional sense.
He would just sort of like...
He would lean in, observe, and basically expose the manipulator through their own actions. He calls it a voluntary self-exposure service.
Wow.
Which is such an interesting way to put it.
It's almost like he's setting a trap for them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you come at me with your manipulation, and I'm just going to step aside and let you kind of hang yourself with your own rope.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this could work, but, it's still kind of counterintuitive, right? Like,
Yeah.
How does someone develop such a strategy, especially, within a family dynamic like his?
Right. It makes you wonder about the psychology behind it all.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't explicitly use these terms, but his approach seems to connect to concepts like Carl Jung's shadow self.
Yeah.
That part of us that we often project onto others.
Right, all the hidden stuff.
Yes, exactly. The stuff we don't want to acknowledge in ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's like by refusing to engage in this power struggle, he's almost forcing the manipulator to confront their own shadow.
Oh, that's interesting.
Their own insecurities, their own negative qualities.
Yeah.
And that can be a very uncomfortable experience for people.
Yeah, nobody wants to look at their own shadow.
Right. So they end up revealing their true intentions and looking pretty bad in the process.
Yeah.
He actually quotes Jung in their essay saying that manipulators inevitably reveal their animus, their primal selves, and expose their internal imbalance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful image.
Yeah, so he's basically turning the tables on them. He's making the manipulator the one who's truly vulnerable.
Right.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
But, okay, so let's say I buy into this whole idea,
Yeah.
I see the potential here, but there's still a part of me that's a little bit hesitant because it just seems risky,
Sure.
right? Like, what if the manipulator doesn't back down? What if they just escalate the situation?
That's a totally valid concern, I think. It's not like this is some foolproof strategy.
Right.
But Aminian seems to have a pretty deep understanding of human psychology.
Yeah.
And he believes that by refusing to play the game, by maintaining his composure, not taking the bait, he's actually disarming the manipulator.
Oh, so like he's not giving them anything to work with?
Exactly. He's taking away their power by refusing to be controlled by their negativity.
It's like he's saying, go ahead, try to manipulate me. I'm not playing your game.
Right.
It's almost like a form of mental jujitsu.
I love that analogy. Using the manipulator's own force against them?
Yeah. And to be clear, it's not about just being passive or submissive.
Yeah.
It's about actively choosing
Right.
how to respond in a way that protects you
Exactly.
and exposes the manipulator's true intentions.
Right.
Okay, so we've got this fascinating backstory, this complex family dynamic, and this almost radical approach to handling conflict.
Right.
But how does this all translate into Aminian's life beyond his family.
Well, that's where things get even more intriguing.
Wait.
Because he's not just some recluse hiding from his family drama.
Right.
He's actually a very successful professional,
Yes.
a transformational executive coach, and a strategic communication architect.
Wait, hold on. So this guy who's all about vulnerability is out there coaching executives
I know.
and shaping communication strategies.
It seems kind of contradictory, right?
It does a little bit.
But when you dig a little deeper into the essay, you start to see how his personal philosophy might actually be his secret weapon.
Okay, so spill the tea.
Mhm.
What kind of professional achievements is he talking about?
Well, he talks about driving impressive sales growth,
Yeah.
optimizing costs for companies,
Right.
and even influencing global policy frameworks.
Really?
Yeah, so this vulnerability as a superpower thing, it's not just some abstract philosophy.
Right.
It's something he's actually putting into practice in the real world.
Yeah.
And it's making me wonder, is there a direct connection between his personal approach to life and his professional success? Is this vulnerability as a superpower strategy something that can be applied in other contexts as well?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right.
And it's one that I think we're going to explore further as we unpack more of Aminion's essay.
Absolutely.
But before we dive into that, I'm curious to hear more about this voluntary self-exposure service thing. Can you give us a concrete example of how he actually uses this approach in his interactions with others?
Absolutely. He gives a few examples in his essay, but one that really stands out is his experience with a colleague who was trying to sabotage his work.
Okay, now that sounds risky.
Yeah.
How did he do that? And more importantly, how did it work?
So basically, he laid out all his plans and ideas to this colleague.
Oh, knowing full well that this person might try to use that information against him?
Exactly.
That takes some guts.
Yeah.
So what happened? Did the colleague try to throw him under the bus?
They did try, but because Minion had been so open and transparent from the start, any attempts to twist his words or misrepresent his intentions were pretty easily exposed.
Oh, so it's like he predicted their move
Yeah.
and set a trap for them.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Right. It kind of backfired on them.
Yeah, he essentially turned the tables by making the manipulator's actions seem even more, underhanded and manipulative.
Right.
This brings up something that we talked about earlier, this psychological concept of projection.
Oh, yeah.
How did that play into this whole vulnerability as a superpower thing?
Well, I think it's central to his strategy.
Okay.
Because he believes that manipulators often project their own insecurities and negative qualities onto others.
Yeah.
So by refusing to engage in a power struggle, by not giving them a target for their projections,
Right.
he's essentially disarming them.
So by being vulnerable, he's taking away their ammunition.
Exactly.
Okay.
And by not reacting defensively or trying to control the situation, he's creating a space for the manipulator to kind of reveal their true intentions.
Well, that's good.
It's like holding up a mirror.
Yeah.
The more they try to manipulate, the more distorted their reflection becomes.
I love that analogy. But let's be real. Not everyone is comfortable with the idea of being vulnerable, especially in a professional setting.
Oh, totally.
It can feel risky, even dangerous.
Yeah.
So how does Aminian address that fear?
He acknowledges it head on. He says that vulnerability isn't about being weak or naive. It's about being authentic and courageous.
Okay.
It's about choosing to show up as your true self, even when it feels uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I can see how that could be empowering.
Right.
But it still requires a lot of trust, right?
Absolutely.
Trust in yourself, trust in others.
Yeah.
Maybe even trust in the universe to have your back.
Yeah. Yeah. And Minion talks about the importance of developing that trust.
Okay.
He sees it as a spiritual practice almost. A way of aligning yourself with a higher power.
Oh, interesting.
He even quotes Robert Frost in the essay.
Oh, really?
He says, "Forgive, O Lord, my little jokes on thee, and I'll forgive thy great big one on me."
Okay, now that is a quote that I have been pondering since we started this deep dive.
Yeah.
What do you think he means by that?
Well, it's definitely open to interpretation.
Right.
But to me, it speaks to a sense of humility and acceptance.
Okay.
Like he's acknowledging that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. And that ultimately we have very little control over the outcome of our lives.
So maybe the little jokes are our attempts to manipulate and control others.
Right.
And the great big one is like the cosmic joke of life itself.
Yeah.
The idea that we think we're in control when in reality we're all just along for the ride.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And I think it ties back to this idea of vulnerability as a superpower.
Yeah.
By surrendering to the unknown.
Right.
by letting go of our need to control everything.
Yeah.
We open ourselves up to a whole new level of experience.
Absolutely.
We become more adaptable, more resilient,
Yes.
and more connected to the world around us.
I think that's at the heart of what he's trying to say.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all connects, but I'm still wrestling with the practical implications.
Sure.
How does this translate into actionable steps that our listeners can take in their own lives?
Yeah, that's the key question, right?
Yeah.
How do we actually put this into practice? Well, I think one key takeaway is that vulnerability isn't about being a pushover or letting people walk all over you. It's about being strategic and intentional in your responses.
So it's not about weakness.
No.
It's about choosing your battles wisely.
Exactly. And sometimes the most powerful choice you can make is to not engage in the fight at all.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those situations where you can't just walk away?
Right.
What if you have to deal with someone who's determined to manipulate or control you? What does Arminian suggest in those cases?
He recommends a few things.
Okay.
First, observe.
Okay.
Don't react immediately.
Okay.
Take some time to understand the manipulator's motives and strategies.
So it's like that old adage, measure twice, cut once.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Next, he suggests using what he calls strategic silence.
Mm.
Instead of getting defensive or arguing back, simply remain calm and quiet.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I can see how silence could be incredibly powerful in certain situations.
Absolutely.
It forces the manipulator to fill the void, which often reveals more than they intended.
Exactly. And finally, he emphasizes the importance of setting clear boundaries.
Okay.
Let the manipulator know what you will and will not tolerate.
So it's not about being passive.
No.
It's about being assertive in a way that protects your well-being.
Exactly. It's about owning your power without resorting to aggression or manipulation.
Yeah, I'm starting to get a much clearer picture of how this vulnerability as a superpower thing actually works in practice.
Yeah.
But there's one more thing I'm curious about. Arminian mentions that he's the sole spiritual heir of his paternal lineage.
Right.
What do you mean by that? And how does that tie into his overall philosophy?
That's a great question, and one that I think goes to the heart of his approach to life.
Okay.
He doesn't elaborate much on the specifics of his spiritual beliefs in the essay.
Okay. But we can infer a bit from his overall tone and perspective, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
He clearly sees vulnerability as a form of spiritual strength. It's about trusting in something bigger than yourself, surrendering to the flow of life, and choosing to see the world through a lens of compassion and understanding.
So it's not just about personal power.
Yeah.
It's about connecting to a deeper source of wisdom and guidance.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Arminian's story so compelling.
Yeah.
He's not just talking about a strategy for winning arguments or getting ahead in business.
Right.
He's talking about a way of being in the world that leads to greater peace, fulfillment, and connection.
It's like he's found a way to integrate these ancient spiritual principles into a modern context.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's what I find so inspiring about Arminian's story.
Me too.
He's not asking us to retreat from the world or become passive observers.
Right.
He's showing us how to navigate the complexities of modern life with more awareness, intention,
Yes.
and yes, vulnerability.
It's a powerful message, especially in a world that often equates vulnerability with weakness.
Right.
He's challenging us to redefine what it means to be strong, to be successful, and to be truly connected to ourselves and others.
And it strikes me that this whole idea of vulnerability as a superpower isn't really a new concept. Yeah. I mean, think about all the great spiritual teachers and philosophers throughout history.
Right.
They've been preaching the power of humility and compassion and surrender for centuries.
Absolutely.
So what Arminian is doing
is
he's essentially taking these ancient wisdom traditions
and
reframing them for a modern audience.
Exactly.
He's showing us how these principles can be applied in our everyday lives, in our relationships, in our careers.
Yeah.
And even in our interactions with those who try to manipulate or control us.
It's about taking those ancient wisdoms and making them practical.
Exactly. And he's doing it in a way that feels both accessible and empowering.
Right.
He's not preaching from a mountaintop.
No.
He's sharing his own personal experiences and insights in a way that feels relatable and inspiring.
I agree. I think that's what makes his message so resonant.
Yeah.
He's walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Joseph Arminian's essay, what are some key takeaways that our listeners can take with them?
Well, I think a biggest takeaway is that vulnerability isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength.
Yeah.
It takes courage to be vulnerable, to show up authentically, and to trust in something bigger than yourself.
And that courage, that authenticity, is what allows us to connect with others on a deeper level, to build trust,
Right.
and to create more meaningful relationships.
Exactly. And it also allows us to navigate challenging situations with more grace, resilience, and even humor.
Yeah.
Remember, a Minion doesn't take himself too seriously. He sees the absurdity of it all,
Right.
the cosmic joke of life, and that allows him to approach everything with a sense of lightness and perspective.
So to our listener out there, here's a final thought-provoking question for you to ponder.
Okay.
What would your life look like if you embraced vulnerability as a superpower?
Hmm.
What if you chose to see your sensitivity, your empathy, your willingness to connect as your greatest assets?
That's a powerful question.
It's a challenge for sure,
Yeah.
but it's also an invitation to step into a more authentic, courageous, and fulfilling way of being in the world.
Absolutely.
And who knows? You might just surprise yourself with the incredible strength and resilience you discover along the way.
I think that's a great place to leave it.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely.